I was staring at my phone screen in disbelief when Mom's text came through at 11:30 that Tuesday night. "Carter, we're out of money. The mortgage is due tomorrow, and Danny emptied everything. Your father wants to call you, but he's too ashamed. Please come home." 3 weeks. That's all it took for my younger brother to destroy everything I'd spent 12 years building. 3 weeks since Dad looked me in the eye and declared, "Your brother will lead," before handing Danny the keys to Patterson Construction, the company I'd built from nothing, and the deed to the family home I'd renovated with my own hands. Now they were broke desperate and crawling back to the son they'd thrown aside for their golden child. The memory of that devastating family meeting still burned in my chest as I sat in my cramped studio apartment, surrounded by the few belongings I'd been allowed to take. 22 years old, that's how young I was when I first picked up the tools that would define my life. Dad had suffered his heart attack on a sweltering July morning, collapsing on a job site while trying to frame a garage addition. The doctors said he couldn't handle physical labor anymore, and our small construction business was hemorrhaging money with medical bills piling up like autumn leaves. I remember making the decision that changed everything. State University had offered me a full scholarship for mechanical engineering, complete with a partial football scholarship that would have covered my living expenses. Coach Patterson, no relation, despite the shared name, had personally driven to our house to convince me not to walk away from what he called a golden ticket to the middle class. But Mom was crying every night over medical bills, and Dad was staring at bankruptcy papers spread across our kitchen table like some cruel jigsaw puzzle. So I walked away from college, picked up Dad's hammer, and taught myself the construction business through trial error and 18-hour workdays that left my hands bloody and my back screaming. The first year was brutal. I slept in my beat-up Ford pickup more nights than I care to remember, parked outside job sites, so I could start before dawn and work until the streetlights came on. Peanut butter sandwiches became my primary food group, and I learned to shower at truck stops when water got shut off at home. But slowly, painfully, Patterson Construction began to grow. I underbid every competitor, worked faster than crews twice my size, and delivered quality that spoke for itself. Word spread through our small Ohio town that Carter Patterson could build anything, fix anything, and finish any job on time and under budget. By my 25th birthday, I had 8 employees. By 30, we were running 3 crews simultaneously and bidding on commercial projects worth 6 figures. The family home told its own story of my dedication. What started as a modest ranch house from 1978 became my personal masterpiece. I added a complete second story with dormers and a wraparound porch, installed custom hardwood floors throughout, redesigned the kitchen with granite countertops and commercial-grade appliances, and built Dad a workshop that was the envy of every contractor in 3 counties. Every weekend for 5 years, I poured sweat and love into that house, transforming it from a simple structure into something that belonged in a home and garden magazine. Danny, meanwhile, drifted through life like smoke through an open window. He'd started 4 different college programs and finished none, claiming each school didn't understand his vision. His ventures included a failed food truck that lost $8,000 in 3 months, a cryptocurrency mining operation that burned out our garage's electrical system, and a brief stint selling insurance that ended when he got caught lying about policy benefits. His latest obsession was day trading, which had already cost him $80,000 of his college fund and whatever money he could charm out of Mom and Dad. 3 weeks ago, Dad called a family meeting in our beautifully restored living room. I'd just returned from a major project in Denver, a commercial renovation that had netted the company $400,000 in profit. I was exhausted, but proud, ready to share the good news about 3 new contracts I'd secured for the fall season. Instead, I walked into an ambush that felt like a physical blow to my chest. "Your brother will lead," Dad announced without preamble, his weathered hands folded on the coffee table I'd built from reclaimed barnwood. "Danny's got fresh ideas and energy. It's time for new leadership at Patterson Construction." The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the solar plexus, leaving me gasping for breath that wouldn't come. Emily, My older sister, who worked as a nurse in Columbus, shifted uncomfortably on the couch, but said nothing. Mom twisted her wedding ring, a nervous habit she'd developed during Dad's recovery years ago. Danny sat there with a smug expression that made my fists clench involuntarily, already acting like he owned the place. "I've signed the papers." Dad continued, his voice gaining strength, as if he'd rehearsed this speech. "Danny gets the business, the house, and operational control of all company accounts. It's what's best for the family's future." I tried to speak, to ask why, to demand an explanation, but the words died in my throat. 12 years of sacrifice, of building something meaningful from nothing, dismissed in a 5-minute conversation. That night, after the papers were signed, and Danny had already started making calls about restructuring the operation, Mom found me packing in my old bedroom. She sat on the edge of my twin bed, the same one I'd slept in through high school, and her tears fell like rain on my duffel bag. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Your father thinks this is right, but my heart is telling me otherwise. You've given up so much for this family, and now—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. We both knew what was happening was fundamentally wrong, but Dad's word had always been law in our house. As I loaded my pickup truck for the last time, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Danny had been secretly meeting with our family lawyer for months, planning this takeover, while I was working on the Denver project. The lawyer, a family friend named Bill Crawford, who'd handled our business affairs for years, had been helping Danny prepare legal documents and financial transfers without ever mentioning it to me. I'd trusted these people with everything, and they'd been plotting behind my back like characters in some twisted soap opera. From my studio apartment across town, I watched Patterson Construction implode with the sickening fascination of witnessing a train wreck in slow motion. My phone buzzed constantly with calls from confused employees, panicked subcontractors, and furious clients who couldn't understand what had happened to the company they'd trusted. The first disaster came within 48 hours. Danny, in his infinite wisdom, had fired Jake Morrison, our lead foreman, who'd been with us for 8 years. Jake was a master craftsman who could read blueprints like sheet music and had trained half our crew in advanced techniques. His replacement was Marcus Webb, Danny's drinking buddy from high school, who'd never built anything more complex than a backyard deck. The decision made about as much sense as replacing a heart surgeon with a grocery store clerk. Our biggest client, Meridian Medical Center, canceled their $2 million expansion project on day 4. Dr. Sarah Chen, the hospital administrator who'd specifically requested our company, based on our reputation, called me directly to express her dismay. "Carter, I don't know what's happening over there, but your brother showed up 3 hours late to our progress meeting, reeking of alcohol, and couldn't answer basic questions about the project timeline." She explained, her professional disappointment evident. "We're going with Thompson Construction instead." I spent sleepless nights tracking the destruction from my laptop, calling suppliers and subcontractors who'd worked with us for years. The picture that emerged was devastating. Danny had immediately implemented what he called efficiency improvements, which translated to cutting corners on materials and rushing through quality control measures. 2 residential clients had already discovered serious electrical code violations, and the city building inspector had red-tagged a commercial foundation for improper rebar placement. The financial hemorrhaging was even worse. Danny had purchased a brand-new BMW 7 Series for $68,000, claiming it was necessary for executive image and client meetings. He'd also taken his girlfriend Stephanie on a week-long Vegas vacation that included a presidential suite at the Bellagio premium show tickets and enough gambling losses to fund a small business startup. The company credit cards showed charges at high-end restaurants, luxury shopping sprees, and a motorcycle dealership, where Danny had apparently decided he needed a Harley-Davidson for weekend recreation. My stomach dropped when I discovered Danny had opened several cryptocurrency trading accounts using company funds. The transaction history read like a masterclass in financial suicide: $50,000 in Bitcoin, bought at peak prices $30,000, in various altcoins that had already lost 60% of their value, and margin trading positions that were bleeding money faster than a severed artery. Danny's trading strategy seemed to consist of buying high and selling low with the consistency of a Swiss timepiece. On day 12, I received a call from Janet Rodriguez, our bookkeeper, who'd been managing company finances since I was 25. Her voice was shaking with anger and fear as she explained what she'd discovered. "Carter, I can't sleep at night knowing what's happening. Danny's transferred over $300,000 out of operating accounts, and we can't make payroll this Friday. The crew is talking about walking off jobs, and I don't blame them." The equipment yard told its own story of mismanagement and greed. When I drove past one evening, I noticed our newest excavator was missing, along with 2 generators and a trailer full of specialized tools. A few discreet phone calls revealed that Danny had sold equipment to raise cash for his trading account, apparently believing his cryptocurrency investments would replace physical assets with digital gold. I visited the company office on a Sunday when I knew it would be empty, using my key that thankfully hadn't been changed yet. The sight that greeted me was heartbreaking. Papers scattered across every surface, empty beer bottles on my old desk, and a layer of dust that suggested cleaning had become optional. The employee schedule board showed chaos, experienced workers quitting without notice, new hires lasting only days before walking out, and job sites sitting idle because nobody knew who was supposed to be working where. The breaking point came when I learned about the loan sharks. Through a connection at the local bank, I discovered that Danny owed $40,000 to unsavory characters who operated outside the traditional financial system. These weren't credit card companies or bank loans that could be negotiated or delayed. These were dangerous people who collected debts through intimidation and violence, and they'd already started making inquiries about the family's assets. Danny's gambling problem, which Mom and Dad had dismissed as youthful experimentation, had evolved into a full-blown addiction that threatened everyone's safety. He'd been placing increasingly desperate bets on sports poker games and online casino platforms, always chasing the big win that would solve his mounting problems. Instead of solutions, he'd created a nightmare that was spiraling beyond anyone's control. The final straw came when I spoke with Marcus Webb directly. Danny's replacement foreman was drowning in projects he didn't understand, supervising crews who'd stopped respecting his authority and making construction decisions that could result in serious injuries or structural failures. "Carter, I'm in over my head here," he admitted during a phone call that lasted 2 hours. "Danny told me this job was easy money, but I don't know how to read these engineering plans, and the guys keep asking technical questions I can't answer. Someone's going to get hurt if this continues." As I hung up the phone that night, I realized the company I'd built was already dead. The question wasn't whether Patterson Construction would survive Danny's leadership, but how much damage would occur before the inevitable collapse. Everything I'd worked for, sacrificed for, and dreamed about was being systematically destroyed by someone who'd never earned the right to make those decisions. The call came at 2:17 in the morning on a Wednesday, jolting me awake in my narrow studio apartment bed. Dad's name appeared on my phone screen, and even in my grogginess, I knew this wasn't good news. I'd never received a call from him past 9 in the evening during my entire adult life, and his voice sounded like it belonged to a broken man when I answered. "Carter, son, I need your help." His words came out cracked and uncertain, like an old foundation shifting under too much weight. "I made a terrible mistake, and I don't know how to fix it. Your mother is having panic attacks, and these men came to the house tonight asking about Danny. They weren't police officers." The story that poured out over the next hour painted a picture of complete family destruction. The loan sharks had visited Mom and Dad's house at 10:30 that evening, politely but firmly explaining that Danny's debt had grown to $62,000 with accumulated interest and penalties. They'd given the family until Friday at 6 in the evening to produce payment, or they would begin collecting alternative collateral, starting with the house, the business equipment, and anything else of value. Dad's voice shook as he described Mom's condition. She hadn't slept for more than 3 hours at a stretch in over a week, jumping at every unexpected sound and refusing to answer the front door. Her hands trembled constantly, and she'd started taking anxiety medication that made her feel disconnected from reality. The woman who'd once managed our household budget with military precision was now too frightened to check the mail. "Where's Danny?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. The silence on the other end of the line stretched uncomfortably before Dad admitted that my brother had disappeared 4 days ago. His last known location was a casino in West Virginia, where his credit card had been used at an ATM before going completely silent. Danny wasn't answering phone calls, text messages, or emails, leaving the family to face the consequences of his decisions alone. The financial situation was even worse than I'd imagined. Dad explained that the bank was threatening foreclosure on both the family home and the business property within 72 hours. Between the missed mortgage payments, unpaid business loans, and defaulted equipment financing, Patterson Construction owed over $400,000 to various creditors. Without immediate intervention, everything would be lost by the end of the week. But the revelation that truly staggered me came when Dad admitted why he'd chosen Danny over me in the first place. "I thought you were too independent, son," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You were always so capable, so strong, that I figured you'd be fine no matter what happened. Danny seemed to need our help more, and I wanted to give him a chance to prove himself. I thought if I believed in him enough, he'd rise to the challenge." The misguided logic behind Dad's favoritism suddenly made sense in the most heartbreaking way possible. He'd punished my competence and rewarded Danny's incompetence, believing that success came from need rather than effort. Dad had confused enabling with encouragement, weakness with potential, and desperation with motivation. His good intentions had created a monster that was now devouring our family from the inside. 20 minutes after Dad hung up, my phone rang again. This time, it was Emily calling from her apartment in Columbus, where she'd been watching the family drama unfold from a safe distance. Her guilt was palpable, as she begged me to save everyone from the disaster she'd helped create. "Carter." I encouraged Dad to give Danny this chance. She confessed through tears that I could hear over the phone connection. "I thought you'd gotten everything you deserved from the business, and Danny needed an opportunity to find himself. I pushed Dad to make the change because I felt sorry for Danny always being in your shadow. Now I realize I was jealous of your success and wanted to see you knock down a few pegs. I'm so ashamed of myself." Emily's honesty was both painful and necessary. She'd watched me sacrifice my 20s and early 30s for the family business, while she pursued her nursing career in the city, building a comfortable life, funded partly by company profits I'd generated. When Danny struggled to find his place in the world, she'd lobbied for him to get a chance at leadership, never considering that leadership had to be earned rather than inherited. The most devastating revelation came near the end of our conversation. Emily informed me that 6 months ago, while I was focused on the Denver project, Dad had secretly transferred my personal savings account into Danny's name. The account contained $93,000 I'd accumulated over 8 years of living below my means and reinvesting in the business. Dad had apparently convinced himself that this money belonged to the family rather than to me individually, and Danny had needed capital for his cryptocurrency ventures. When I asked Emily how she knew about the transfer, she admitted that she'd been present when Dad met with the bank manager to authorize the change. "Dad said you'd never notice because you rarely checked that account, and by the time you found out, Danny's investments would have made enough profit to pay you back with interest," she explained. "I should have called you immediately, but Dad made me promise to keep it secret until Danny's business ventures paid off." As I processed this information in my tiny apartment, staring at the ceiling that was barely 7 feet above my head, I felt something shift inside my chest. The anger that had been consuming me for 3 weeks began transforming into something colder and more focused. My family had stolen from me, lied to me, and thrown me away for a gambling addict who destroyed everything I'd built. But now, they needed me to save them from their own poor judgment. The irony was almost laughable. the son they deemed too independent, was the only person capable of fixing their self-created disaster. The brother they'd considered less worthy of leadership was the only one with the skills, connections, and financial credibility to prevent total ruin. They'd broken their own family through favoritism and poor judgment, and now they were discovering that competence couldn't be faked or inherited. But as I sat in my apartment surrounded by the modest furnishings I'd purchased, with what little money remained in my checking account, I realized something important. This wasn't just about saving my family anymore. This was about justice, accountability, and making sure that never again would my sacrifices be dismissed or my contributions be stolen. If I was going to fix this situation, it would be on my terms with my conditions and under my complete control. The people who'd thrown me away were about to learn exactly how much I was worth. Monday morning found me sitting in the offices of Hamilton Burke and Associates, the law firm I'd retained over the weekend, after researching every attorney in 3 counties. Sandra Burke, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, who specialized in business disputes and family law, spread the documents across her conference table like a general planning a military campaign. Your father's transfer of your personal savings was legally questionable at best. She explained her finger tracing through bank records I'd requested Friday afternoon. Since you're over 18 and the account was in your name, only he had no legal authority to authorize that transfer without your written consent. We can pursue criminal charges for financial fraud, civil recovery for the stolen funds, plus damages for the business losses his actions caused. The evidence folder grew thicker as we worked through the morning. Financial records showing Danny's misuse of company funds, employee statements documenting the deterioration of work quality and safety standards, and client complaints that painted a picture of systematic business destruction. Sandra's paralegal, a meticulous young man named David Chen, had spent the weekend creating a timeline that clearly showed how Danny's leadership had transformed a profitable company into a liability nightmare. My next stop was Industrial Bank and Trust, where I'd maintained business accounts for over a decade. Tom Bradley, the commercial lending officer who'd approved our equipment loans and credit lines, ushered me into his office with the enthusiasm of a man welcoming back a prodigal son. His expression grew increasingly grave as I explained the situation and presented my rescue proposal. Carter, your credit rating and business history give you significant leverage here, Tom said, reviewing my financial statements and projected recovery plan. If you're willing to personally guarantee the outstanding loans and provide a capital injection of $150,000, we can restructure everything under your control. The bank would much rather work with proven leadership than foreclose on properties that might not sell in today's market. The personal guarantee was a significant risk that would tie my financial future to the company's success, but it also gave me complete control over decision-making. No more family interference, no more gambling addicts spending money we didn't have, and no more unqualified management destroying relationships I'd spent years building. Tom prepared the paperwork, while I made phone calls to suppliers and subcontractors who'd been wondering if Patterson Construction would honor its commitments. My conversation with Maria Santos, owner of Santos Building Supply, illustrated how badly Danny had damaged our reputation in just 3 weeks. "Carter, thank God you're back," she said when I identified myself on the phone. "Danny placed a $40,000 order 2 weeks ago, and then tried to return half of it for cash instead of store credit. When I explained our policy, he got belligerent and accused me of cheating the family business. Several of my employees heard him threatening to find cheaper suppliers who'd treat him with respect. One by one, I contacted every vendor, subcontractor, and business partner who'd worked with Patterson Construction over the years. My reputation for honesty and competence opened doors that would have remained permanently closed to Danny, and within hours, I had verbal commitments for extended payment terms, material deliveries, and crew availability. The construction community is surprisingly small and tightly connected, and word spread quickly that Carter Patterson was back in control. The employee situation required delicate handling. I arranged to meet our remaining crew at Murphy's Diner, a local restaurant, where we'd celebrated project completions and discussed work schedules for years. Jake Morrison, the foreman Danny had fired, drove down from Columbus, where he'd been working temporarily for Thompson Construction. His presence alone signaled to other workers that serious management was returning. "Boys, I won't lie to you about how bad things got," I told the 8 men gathered around 2 pushed-together tables in the diner's back section. "Danny made mistakes that put jobs at risk, paychecks in jeopardy, and our company reputation in the toilet. But if you're willing to come back and work with me, I guarantee every man here will get caught up on missed pay within 2 weeks, plus a bonus for sticking with us through this rough patch." The response was immediate and unanimous. These were craftsmen who took pride in their work, and they'd watched helplessly as Danny's incompetence destroyed projects they'd invested their skills in creating. Rocky Martinez, our senior electrician who'd been with us for 6 years, spoke for the group when he said, "Carter, we never wanted to work for your brother. We worked for you, and we'll follow you back into this mess if you think it can be fixed." The legal strategy required careful timing and documentation. Sandra Burke had prepared 2 sets of papers, one that would transfer complete ownership and control of Patterson Construction back to me, and another that would pursue criminal charges against Danny and Dad for financial fraud. The first set was ready for immediate signing, while the second would remain in reserve as leverage to ensure compliance. My conditions for saving the family were non-negotiable and legally binding. Complete ownership transfer of Patterson Construction, with Danny permanently removed from any management role, full restitution of my stolen savings account, with interest and penalties, exclusive control over all business operations and financial decisions, and signed agreements preventing future interference from family members. In exchange, I would pay off all outstanding debts, prevent foreclosure on the family home, and avoid pursuing criminal charges as long as everyone honored the new arrangement. The loan shark situation required a different approach entirely. Through contacts in the construction industry, I identified Anthony Ricci, a local businessman who occasionally helped resolve financial disputes that traditional banks wouldn't handle. Anthony operated a check cashing service and small loan business, but his real value was his ability to negotiate with people who collected debts through intimidation. "Your brother owes money to some serious individuals," Anthony explained during our meeting at his office Tuesday afternoon. "But these guys are businessmen first, and they'd rather get paid than create problems that attract law enforcement attention. If you can guarantee full payment within 30 days, plus a reasonable fee for their inconvenience, they'll back off your family immediately." The financial commitment was substantial but manageable. $62,000 for Danny's debt, plus a $15,000 inconvenience fee, meant $77,000 to eliminate the immediate physical threat to Mom and Dad. Combined with the $150,000 needed for business debt restructuring and the $93,000 to cover my stolen savings, I was looking at a total commitment of over $300,000 to clean up a mess I hadn't created. But I had the resources, and more importantly, I had the leverage. The company's client list, employee relationships, and business reputation all belonged to me in practical terms, even if the legal ownership had been temporarily transferred. Without my knowledge, connections, and credibility, Patterson Construction was worthless. With my leadership, it was worth millions. The most satisfying moment came Wednesday evening when I called Dad to present my terms. His relief was palpable as I explained how I could save the family home, pay off the loan sharks, and restore the business to profitability. But his relief turned to shock when I outlined my non-negotiable conditions and made it clear that his days of making decisions about my life and work were permanently over. "You'll get your family back, Dad, and Mom will be safe," I told him as we wrapped up the 40-minute conversation. "But you'll never again have control over the business I built or the money I earned. Those days are finished forever." Thursday evening brought the family meeting I'd been both dreading and anticipating for 3 weeks. I'd insisted on neutral territory, so we gathered at Sandra Burke's conference room, rather than the family home where Dad's authority had gone unquestioned for decades. Mom sat quietly in a corner chair, her hands still trembling slightly from the anxiety medication, while Dad studied legal documents with the intensity of a man trying to read his own death warrant. Emily had driven up from Columbus, her guilt evident in the way she avoided eye contact when I entered the room. Sandra positioned herself at the head of the conference table, legal documents, arranged in neat stacks that represented the complete restructuring of our family's financial and business relationships. The atmosphere felt like a combination of intervention, business negotiation, and funeral service. Danny's arrival 20 minutes later changed the entire dynamic of the room. He walked in, wearing wrinkled clothes and sporting 3 days of stubble, but his demeanor suggested arrogance rather than remorse. His bloodshot eyes and unsteady movement indicated he'd been drinking heavily, possibly to build courage for facing the family he'd betrayed and abandoned. Well, the prodigal son returns to save the day. Danny slurred, dropping into a chair across from me with theatrical flourish. Let me guess you want everyone to grovel and apologize, while you ride in on your white horse to fix all the problems. His breath smelled like whiskey and cigarettes, and his shirt bore stains that suggested he'd been sleeping in his car, or worse accommodations. The explosion that followed was inevitable and cathartic. Years of accumulated resentment, jealousy, and competitive tension erupted in a shouting match that required Sandra's intervention to prevent physical violence. Danny accused me of manipulating the family's financial crisis to regain control of the business, while I presented evidence of his systematic theft and destruction of everything I'd built. You stole $93,000 from my personal savings account, I said, sliding bank records across the table with forced calm. Money I earned through 12 years of 18-hour workdays and weekends spent building this company instead of having a social life. You gambled it away on cryptocurrency schemes and casino trips, while our employees couldn't afford to feed their families. Danny's response revealed the depth of his delusion and entitlement. He claimed the money belonged to the family collectively, since the business had supported everyone for years, conveniently ignoring that his contributions to company success had been approximately zero. In his twisted logic, my competence and work ethic obligated me to support his lifestyle and cover his losses indefinitely. Dad promised me you'd never find out about the transfer, Danny shouted, pointing an accusing finger at our father. He said you had so much money saved that you wouldn't miss it, and my investments would pay everyone back with interest. It's not my fault the cryptocurrency market crashed before I could cash out. The revelation hit Dad like a physical blow. His face went pale as he realized Danny had just admitted to premeditated theft rather than innocent borrowing. The legal implications were serious enough to result in federal charges, and Sandra was taking notes that could be used in criminal proceedings if necessary. But Danny wasn't finished destroying himself. In his drunken state, he continued revealing information that made the situation progressively worse. He'd forged my signature on several business documents, used company credit cards for personal expenses, totaling over $40,000, and sold equipment without proper documentation to raise cash for gambling debts. I deserve to run this company as much as you do, he declared with the confidence of someone completely disconnected from reality. Dad chose me because he knew you'd abandon the family business the first chance you got. At least I was loyal enough to stay close to home instead of chasing big contracts in other states. The irony was staggering. Danny had destroyed the business within 3 weeks while accusing me of abandonment, despite the fact that I'd traveled for work specifically to grow our company and increase profits that supported the entire family. His version of loyalty consisted of stealing gambling and threatening everyone's financial security while contributing nothing of value. Emily finally found her voice as the argument escalated beyond productive discussion. Danny, stop talking, she pleaded, her nurse's training making her recognize that her brother was digging his own legal grave. You're admitting to crimes that could send you to prison, and you're hurting people who love you despite your mistakes. But Danny's response shocked everyone in the room with its viciousness and bitter honesty. Love Me Dad only chose me to lead, because he knew Carter would succeed no matter what happened. I've been the family charity case my entire life, getting opportunities I didn't earn and support I didn't deserve. At least this way, I got to destroy something Carter cared about before he inevitable took it all back. The admission of deliberate sabotage was devastating for Dad, who genuinely believed Danny could grow into leadership responsibility given the right opportunity. Mom began crying softly as she realized her younger son had intentionally hurt the family that had sacrificed so much to support his dreams and schemes. Sandra recognized that the meeting was deteriorating beyond usefulness and suggested a 15-minute break to let emotions cool. During that time, she pulled me aside to explain that Danny's admissions had given us enough evidence to pursue serious criminal charges if we chose that path. When we reconvened, I presented Danny with two options: sign documents admitting his financial crimes and relinquishing all claims to family business assets, or face criminal prosecution that would likely result in several years in federal prison. He could also choose to enter a rehabilitation program that I would pay for, but only after making legal restitution for his theft and destruction. The choice was simple, but not easy. Danny's pride warred with his self-preservation instincts as he read through documents that would legally acknowledge his wrongdoing and permanently remove him from any business involvement. His hands shook as he realized that his moment of power had cost him everything he'd ever hoped to inherit or control. Dad's breakdown was equally emotional as he confronted the consequences of his favoritism and poor judgment. The son he'd tried to help had intentionally destroyed the business built by the son he'd taken for granted. His good intentions had enabled destructive behavior and nearly cost the family everything they'd worked to build over 2 decades. I thought I was giving Danny the chance to prove himself. Dad whispered, his voice barely audible over Mom's quiet sobbing. Instead, I enabled him to hurt everyone who loved him, including himself. Carter, I owe you an apology that I'll never be able to make properly, and a debt I'll never be able to repay. The revelation that emerged during Dad's emotional breakdown was something none of us had expected. While searching through old family documents to prepare for the legal transfer, he discovered birth records and adoption papers hidden in a safety deposit box that Mom had never mentioned. Danny wasn't Dad's biological son. The truth explained decades of overcompensation and misguided favoritism. Dad had been trying to prove his love for an adopted child by giving him opportunities and support that weren't earned, while unconsciously punishing his biological son for not needing the same level of assistance. The family dynamics that had seemed unfair and illogical suddenly made painful sense. Mom's quiet confession filled in the missing details. Danny was the result of a teenage relationship that ended when his biological father abandoned them upon learning about the pregnancy. She'd married Dad when Danny was 6 months old, and he'd legally adopted Danny without ever treating him differently than his biological children. The secret had been intended to protect Danny from feeling unwanted or different, but it had created a family dynamic that ultimately damaged everyone involved. As the meeting ended near midnight, we had signed documents transferring complete business control back to me, a payment plan for restitution that would take Danny years to complete, and agreements for rehabilitation services that might help him address his gambling addiction. The family we'd once been was essentially dead, but perhaps we could build something healthier from the pieces that remained. The next 6 months unfolded like a carefully orchestrated symphony of redemption and renewal. Danny kept his word about rehabilitation, checking himself into a residential program in Arizona that specialized in gambling addiction and financial recovery. His weekly phone calls to Mom revealed genuine remorse and slowly developing self-awareness, though trust would take much longer to rebuild than good intentions required. Patterson Construction's resurrection exceeded even my most optimistic projections. Jake Morrison returned as lead foreman with a 20% raise and equity participation that made him invested in our long-term success. Rocky Martinez took over as safety coordinator and electrical supervisor implementing training programs that reduced workplace incidents to zero within 2 months. The crew that had scattered during Danny's disastrous tenure came back with enthusiasm that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with construction work in the first place. Our first major project after the restructuring was the Meridian Medical Center expansion that Dr. Sarah Chen had awarded to Thompson Construction during the chaos. When Thompson encountered structural engineering problems that exceeded their capabilities, Dr. Chen called to ask if Patterson Construction could provide consulting services. 3 weeks later, we'd taken over the entire project with a change order that increased our original contract by 30%. The work felt like returning home after a long exile. I spent my days moving between job sites, solving complex engineering problems, and watching skilled craftsmen transform architectural drawings into physical reality. The company culture I'd spent years developing reasserted itself. Naturally, attention to detail, pride in craftsmanship, and commitment to safety that kept everyone productive and uninjured. Financial recovery followed operational success with mathematical precision. Within 90 days, we'd eliminated all outstanding vendor debts and restored credit relationships that had been damaged during Danny's tenure. Equipment purchases resumed as project profits provided capital for expansion, and our bonding capacity increased to accommodate larger commercial contracts. The family dynamics required more delicate reconstruction than the business operations. Dad underwent therapy sessions with Dr. Elizabeth Morgan, a family counselor who specialized in addressing favoritism and dysfunctional relationship patterns. His progress was slow but genuine, marked by increasing awareness of how his decisions had affected everyone in the family circle. I confused need with worthiness. Dad explained during one of our monthly coffee meetings at Murphy's Diner. Danny needed more help, so I assumed he deserved more opportunities. I never considered that competence and reliability were more important than neediness for leadership roles. My good intentions nearly destroyed everything you'd built. Mom found her own path to recovery through meaningful work rather than therapy sessions. I offered her a position as Patterson Construction's operations manager, handling scheduling vendor relationships, and employee benefits administration. Her natural organizational skills and attention to detail proved invaluable for managing the company's growing complexity. "I've never had a job outside our home," she confessed during her first week of work. "Your father always insisted that my place was supporting his business from behind the scenes. Having my own responsibilities and paycheck makes me feel like a complete person for the first time in 30 years. The transformation was remarkable. Confidence replaced anxiety. Purpose replaced purposelessness, and independence replaced total dependence on other people's decisions. Emily's guilt motivated her to become a bridge between the old family dynamics and the healthier relationships we were building. Her nursing background helped her understand addiction as a medical condition rather than a moral failure, making her Danny's strongest advocate for continued treatment. She also mediated conversations between Dad and me when emotions threatened to overwhelm productive communication. The most satisfying development was our new approach to family financial management. Instead of the old system where Dad controlled everything and everyone else received allowances or gifts, we established individual accountability for each family member. Mom's salary gave her economic independence. Emily managed her own finances from her nursing career, and Dad learned to live within a budget for the first time in decades. My personal living situation reflected the new family boundaries I'd established. Rather than returning to my old bedroom in the family home, I renovated the space above Patterson Construction's office into a comfortable apartment that provided privacy while keeping me close to the business. The arrangement gave me independence without complete separation, allowing relationships to heal without returning to old patterns of control and dependence. The international contract opportunity that materialized in month 5 felt like validation from the universe itself. Yamamoto Construction, a Japanese company specializing in earthquake-resistant building techniques, had learned about our reputation for quality and innovation through industry connections. They offered a consulting contract worth $5 million over 3 years, involving technology transfer and joint projects in California's seismic zones. The irony was perfect. While Danny had been destroying our local reputation, my work in Denver had created connections that opened doors to opportunities beyond anything we'd previously imagined. The international recognition validated years of commitment to excellence and positioned Patterson Construction for expansion into markets that would have been impossible to reach from our small Ohio town. Training for the Yamamoto contract required learning advanced engineering techniques and construction methods that challenged even experienced crews. But the intellectual stimulation and professional growth motivated everyone involved, creating an atmosphere of excitement and possibility that had been missing during the family drama months. Jake Morrison's reaction captured the general mood perfectly. Carter, when I started in construction 20 years ago, I never imagined I'd be learning earthquake engineering from Japanese masters or working on projects in California. This feels like winning the lottery, except we earned it through hard work instead of blind luck. The loan sharks who'd threatened Mom and Dad became distant memories as Anthony Ricci confirmed full payment of Danny's debts plus agreed-upon fees. The dangerous men who'd visited our family home were satisfied with financial resolution and disappeared from our lives as suddenly as they'd appeared. Peace of mind returned to replace the constant anxiety that had plagued everyone during the crisis months. By month 6, Patterson Construction employed 15 full-time craftsmen, maintained contracts worth over $8 million, and held a reputation for quality that attracted clients from 3 states. The company I'd built from nothing had not only survived near destruction, but emerged stronger, more profitable, and better positioned for future growth than ever before. The personal relationships within our family remained fragile, but showed genuine improvement. Dad's therapy had helped him understand that love wasn't measured by favoritism or control. Mom had discovered independence and purpose through meaningful work, and Emily had learned that enabling destructive behavior wasn't kindness. Even Danny's progress in rehabilitation offered hope for eventual reconciliation, though trust would require years rather than months to fully restore. 1 year after that devastating midnight phone call, I stood on the observation deck of the Yamamoto Technology Center in Sacramento, watching our crew install seismic dampeners that would protect the building during California's inevitable earthquakes. The late afternoon sun painted the construction site in golden hues that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with building things that would outlast my lifetime. Jake Morrison joined me on the deck, his hard hat pushed back on his graying head as he surveyed the day's progress, with satisfaction that came from work done right. "You know, Carter," he said, his voice carrying the contentment of a master craftsman. "A year ago, I thought this company was finished. Today, we're working on projects that'll be talked about in engineering schools for decades. Sometimes, things have to break completely before they can be rebuilt properly." The transformation had exceeded everyone's expectations, including my own. Patterson Construction now operated with 3 distinct divisions: traditional residential and commercial work in Ohio, seismic retrofitting projects throughout California, and international consulting services that had attracted inquiries from companies in Chile, Turkey, and New Zealand. Our reputation for innovation and quality had spread through professional networks that connected craftsmen and engineers across continents. Danny had completed his rehabilitation program in Arizona and was now working for Habitat for Humanity in Phoenix, building affordable housing for families who reminded him daily that construction served purposes beyond profit. His weekly phone calls to Mom revealed a humility and perspective that had been absent during his years of entitlement and self-destruction. Forgiveness was progressing slowly but genuinely, as he demonstrated through actions rather than promises that he'd learned from his mistakes. "I understand now that I never earned the right to lead," he'd told me during our first conversation in 8 months. "Dad gave me something I hadn't worked for, and I resented you for deserving what I'd been handed. The program helped me see that my anger was really shame about my own laziness and incompetence. I can't undo the damage I caused, but I can make sure I never hurt people I'm supposed to love ever again." Dad's therapy had produced equally remarkable changes in his perspective and behavior. Dr. Morgan had helped him understand that favoritism damaged both the favored child and the capable one, creating resentment and dysfunction that could destroy families across generations. His weekly sessions had evolved from crisis management to personal growth, addressing control issues and fear-based decision-making that had characterized his parenting for decades. I raised Danny to need me and Carter to not need me. Dad had explained during one of our monthly dinners at Murphy's Diner. I thought neediness was love and independence was rejection, so I enabled weakness and punished strength. Now I understand that the greatest gift a parent can give their child is the confidence to succeed without constant support or validation. Mom's transformation had been the most visually dramatic of anyone in the family. Her role as operations manager had revealed organizational talents and business instincts that had been suppressed during decades of traditional homemaking. She'd implemented inventory tracking systems that reduced material waste by 15%, negotiated vendor contracts that saved thousands of dollars monthly, and created employee benefit programs that attracted skilled craftsmen from competing companies. I spent 30 years believing that my value came from serving other people's ambitions. She'd confided during a coffee break in the company office that had become her professional home. Working here has taught me that I have skills and intelligence that deserve respect and compensation. I wish I'd discovered this confidence 20 years ago, but I'm grateful to have it now. Emily had channeled her guilt about encouraging Dad's favoritism toward Danny into advocacy for family therapy and communication improvement. Her nursing background had helped her understand that addiction affected entire families, not just the individual struggling with compulsive behaviors. She'd become the family's unofficial counselor, mediating conversations and helping everyone process emotions without returning to destructive patterns. The international success had opened doors that led to opportunities beyond anything I'd imagined possible from our small Ohio town. Yamamoto Construction had invited me to speak at engineering conferences in Tokyo and Los Angeles, sharing techniques we'd developed for combining traditional American construction methods with advanced seismic protection systems. The recognition felt like validation for years of commitment to excellence over profit maximization. But perhaps the most meaningful development was meeting Sarah Chen's niece, Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, during a medical center project in Columbus. Amanda was a structural engineer who specialized in hospital design, and our professional collaboration had evolved into a personal relationship that felt completely different from anything I'd experienced before. She understood the satisfaction of building things that mattered, shared my commitment to quality over shortcuts, and brought intellectual stimulation that challenged me to grow personally as well as professionally. "You know what I admire most about you?" Amanda had asked during dinner the previous weekend. "You rebuilt your family's trust the same way you build your projects, with patience, precision, and absolute commitment to doing things right. Most people would have walked away or demanded revenge, but you chose reconstruction over destruction." The financial success had provided security that allowed me to be generous without feeling exploited. Danny's rehabilitation costs Dad's therapy expenses, and Mom's gradual assumption of financial independence were investments in family healing rather than obligatory support for people who took my contributions for granted. The difference in motivation had changed the entire dynamic of our relationships. The company's growth had created opportunities for employees who demonstrated loyalty during our most difficult period. Rocky Martinez was now studying for his contractor's license with company support, positioning him to lead his own crews within 2 years. 3 apprentices were attending trade school with scholarship funding from Patterson Construction, ensuring that skilled craftsmen would be available for future projects. Investment in people had proven more valuable than investment in equipment or marketing. Standing on that observation deck, as the California sun set behind the Pacific Ocean, I reflected on the lessons that had emerged from our family's near destruction and rebuilding. True leadership couldn't be inherited or gifted. It had to be earned through competence, consistency, and courage to make difficult decisions. Family love wasn't measured by favoritism or enabling destructive behavior. It was demonstrated through holding people accountable while supporting their genuine efforts to grow and improve. The greatest irony was that losing everything had ultimately led to gaining more than I'd ever possessed before. The business was more profitable, the family relationships were healthier, and my personal life included love and partnership that had been impossible when I was consumed by work and family drama. Sometimes destruction was necessary before authentic reconstruction could begin. As I walked back toward the construction trailer, where tomorrow's work schedules waited for my review, I realized that the angry young man who'd built Patterson Construction, through sheer determination and 18-hour workdays, had evolved into someone capable of building relationships with the same patience and skill. The tools were different, but the satisfaction of creating something meaningful and lasting remained exactly the same. The story of our family's collapse and renewal had become something I shared with other business owners who struggled with succession planning and family dynamics. The lessons weren't unique to construction companies. Competence mattered more than blood relationships enablement destroyed, rather than helped struggling family members, and recovery required accountability rather than excuses. But perhaps the most important lesson was that walking away sometimes wasn't abandonment. It was the only way to save what truly mattered. My temporary exile had forced the family to confront consequences they'd been avoiding and recognize value they'd been taking for granted. The Carter who returned to save them was stronger, wiser, and absolutely unwilling to accept treatment that didn't match his contributions. The phone call that had awakened me at 2:17 that Wednesday morning had felt like the end of everything I'd worked to build. Instead, it had been the beginning of something better, a family built on respect rather than obligation, a business founded on merit rather than favoritism, and relationships that enhanced rather than drained everyone involved. As Jake had observed, sometimes things needed to break completely before they could be rebuilt properly. Our family had shattered under the weight of favoritism, enabling, and poor judgment, but the reconstruction had created something stronger and more beautiful than what had existed before. The golden California sunset faded into purple twilight as I reviewed the day's progress reports surrounded by the sounds of skilled craftsmen finishing their work with pride and precision. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight offered the satisfaction of problem-solved, relationships healed, and dreams that had grown larger than I'd ever dared imagine possible. What I'd learned was that family strength didn't come from avoiding conflict or protecting people from consequences. It came from holding everyone to standards that brought out their best efforts, supporting genuine growth while refusing to enable destructive behavior, and understanding that love sometimes meant saying no to people who weren't ready to hear it. The construction business had taught me that solid foundations required careful preparation, quality materials, and skilled craftsmanship that couldn't be rushed or faked. Building healthy relationships followed exactly the same principles: patience, integrity, and absolute commitment to doing things right, even when shortcuts seemed easier or more profitable. Standing in my office above the construction yard where this story had begun, surrounded by architectural drawings for projects that would span 3 continents, I felt grateful for every difficult lesson that had brought us to this point. The family that had almost destroyed itself through favoritism and poor judgment had learned to function as a team where everyone's contributions were valued and everyone's growth was supported. The young man who'd sacrificed his college dreams to save a failing business had evolved into someone capable of building dreams that exceeded anything he'd originally imagined possible. Sometimes the greatest gift life offers isn't what we think we want, but what we actually need to become the people we're meant to be. Have you ever had to walk away from family or a situation you loved in order to save it? Sometimes the hardest decision is also the right one, and the temporary pain of separation can lead to stronger relationships built on respect rather than obligation. I'd love to hear your thoughts about family dynamics, business leadership, or times when you've had to choose between enabling someone's destructive behavior and holding them accountable for change. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe for more stories about overcoming family challenges and business obstacles, and share this with someone who might need to hear about the power of setting boundaries with people you love. Your support means everything to me, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to share these experiences with people who understand that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in someone else's destruction. Thank you for listening to this story about rebuilding after betrayal, and I hope it encourages you to value your own worth and contributions, regardless of how others might treat them. Remember that your competence and character have value that can't be diminished by other people's poor judgment or jealousy. Take care, and I'll see you in the next story.